Hello and welcome to a look at Leviathan for the Commodore 64. The game was released by English Software. Leviathan, as you may be able to notice, is a 3D isometric shooter, which I suppose in some way makes it somewhat unique, even though what was it called? Saxon was of a similar style. The plot of Leviathan is non-existent. Someone decided to write up a few attempted smart-ass comments about 30 seconds in the future, pop music, and blah blah blah, whatever crap. It's completely and utterly irrelevant. But the objective is to fly over three different landscapes and shooting enemies, a set amount of enemies, in order to progress to a higher skill level, or optionally move on to another of the landscapes. The landscapes, of course, contains several obstacles that you have to navigate or blow up, depending on whether they are blow upable or not. And because, of course, it is a 3D isometric kind of thing, you have different altitudes that you can fly at, which is again something that is definitely Saxon inspired, where you have to be mindful of your altitude. But that's not good enough for Leviathan. No, 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 no. You need to be able to fly sideways, and of course, because you are tasked with blowing up a specific amount of enemies, you have to be able to fly backwards as well. Because if they fly past you and you couldn't turn around, then everything would be bad and not fun. And that is something that has been accommodated in the game, which is, I'd say, one of the defining parts of the game. I will be generous and call it. Yeah. More about that momentarily. The first landscape you see here is part of the main program, and you have two other landscapes that you can load, whereas I'm going to showcase one of them. Cityscape and Greekscape. Apparently, I never bothered looking at Greekscape, but because of course the altitude thing, it means that you have to be at a certain height in order to, or a certain altitude, to use the proper expression, in order to hit certain objects. But of course, as you decrease your altitude, you also increase the chance of smacking into random things, and it is not always obvious what is a barrier and what is not. You basically have to use the shadow of your Leviathan spacecraft thing in order to have some sort of idea of how high or low you are flying. Obviously, I mean, you can see when you're flying low, but the best way to work out whether an obstacle is at your height or not is to shoot. Because if your shots are getting stopped by something, then your spacecraft thing will probably also get stopped by it. So that's usually a decent indication of when it's time to increase your altitude or get a first class headache. You know what, let's just take the technical aspects. It is important, I guess, of a game. One thing that in modern games, having 200 people doing art is perfectly normal. And that is usually because modern games are so graphically intensive that if they didn't employ 200 people, a game would take 10 years to make. But usually you also have an art director and a lead artist defining the art. So you have a uniform looking game. Back in the Commodore 64 and Amiga days, it was uncommon to have more than one, maybe two people doing graphics, and this game actually has a handful of people doing graphics, and I don't know about anyone else, but for me it is distinctively obvious that certain people have been responsible for certain different things. The graphics are not disjointed, but they are definitely. Um, it is relatively easy to tell they are not done by the same person. It lacks that certain uniformity that you would normally expect. That being said, the graphics are decent at best. Some of it looks decidedly, I wouldn't say amateurish, that's a bit rude, but it just feels like graphically someone decided, you know what we need here is something that's 70 feet tall and fires bizarre things at you. Yeah. The background and landscapes are decent enough, but it's nothing particularly interesting to look at. And the fact that you would fly around shooting constantly in order to work out what should be shot, what should be avoided, all that kind of stuff gets tedious after a while. The sound design, David Whittaker was responsible for the sound of this game, and it is supposed to be one of his, the title track apparently is supposed to be one of his better music pieces as of 1987 at least, but I think personally it's a bit rubbish, but what do I know? I'm no expert in the field. The sound effects are bare bone. They are not necessarily bad, but you get tired listening to the gunfire after not too long. The gameplay, fly around landscapes and shoot enemies, and that is the gameplay. What is making the gameplay interesting, or not interesting in the case of this game, is the control scheme. Because it is a 3D isometric game, you can increase and decrease your altitude, as I've definitely made a very specific mention of already. But of course, because you can also fly sideways instead of shifting your car from side to side, you actually turn to the side you are flying. It means that lining up shots can be very, very awkward, especially when the shots needs to hit off to the side of the object you are trying to shoot. But that's not the best part. The best part is, of course, because enemies can fly behind you and you need to catch up on them, you can fly backwards. And when you fly backwards, the controls flip, which is physically very, very intuitive, I suppose. If you fly the other way, then suddenly right becomes left and left becomes right. But it doesn't do anything for the game. It just makes everything extremely convoluted and confusing and not particularly enjoyable. In order to increase or decrease your speed, you need to press fire and press forward or backwards respectively. And you can possibly imagine that you are shooting at stuff and then you're trying to get to the proper altitude to hit something, and then you increase your speed instead of decreasing the altitude, smacking into the obstacle you're trying to shoot. Yeah. Leviathan, I don't honestly know what to think about it. It's not particularly enjoyable. It's not particularly pretty. It doesn't sound particularly good. I would see this as a blinking mess. To me, it feels like it was a bunch of people having a very red party saying, let's make a game. And so they did. Yeah. On that note, thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time. Bye bye for now.